So here is what the general format of this is going to be. This will be the pilot. I'm going to go ahead and dub this the tournament podcast. The reason being is this: we're going to do these in tournament format. It's going to be random tournament. I'll tell you in a minute here what the topic is. We can get some initial input on the entrance into the tournament, if you will. Then we'll discuss down to who we think the winner is. I guess we can vary these. For this one, I went ahead with 16 entrants because 8 just wasn't enough for all of the good names that were out there with this. And also keep in mind, and I'll remind you as we're going, that each of us has a veto. So I figured that would be kind of an interesting little caveat to add. So if it's like I vote for a particular wrestler, in this case, Marty votes for a particular wrestler, and Mike goes opposite, obviously me and Marty are going to win. However, Mike can use his veto to wipe out our selection, and then he would be able to move forward with his choice. Unless then, like say, I just can't agree with that, and then I use my veto to veto Mike. See what I mean? But once you do it once, it's done. So, all right. So, here was my idea for our initial one here. I knew going out of the gate it was going to have to be pro wrestling related. I had a couple of different things I was thinking of, but I kind of went with something common in the end, which was and where's the little thing he had here? I think I may have accidentally, oh wait, there we go. So the initial topic is going to be the greatest wrestler to never win a world title. Now, this was it could be very hard to put this list together, so I had to whittle it down to more or less modern era wrestlers, and it has to be pretty much not winning a title in WCW, NWA, or WWF, WWE. All right, well, I put the tournament bracket. We had it randomly generated. It is on Discord if you gentlemen want to take a look. Okay. I'm not really going to go by the seeding numbers. It gave Brian Pillman the 1 seed versus William Regal the 16 seed. I'm just using the actual matchups. But in the very first matchup, we have a prime Brian Pillman against a prime William Regal. Obviously, we'll take these gentlemen in their primes. And I guess I'll get the ball rolling on this first matchup. I don't really... First of all, there's going to be some bias here. Brian Pillman, I am a Cincinnati Bengals fan, former Cincinnati Bengal himself. I thought, obviously he had a world of potential ahead of him. Was it an ankle injury? I believe that's...
Yep. Yeah, I believe he was in a car wreck. So,
yeah, and it unfortunately derailed his career. But on that one, I'm not going to give a whole lot of debate. I'm going to go with Brian Pillman. So what say you, gentlemen?
For me, I mean, again, if we're just going based on wrestler to wrestler, as if it was, somewhat real and everything like that, it's a tough one because William Regal was accomplished. He was known as one of the best technical wrestlers in the world. And he had, probably a good 40, 50 pounds on Pillman, but...
Well, I do appreciate you saying that, by the way, because I started off saying that we need to keep in mind, their wrestling abilities against each other, and I immediately came out of the gate with a biased opinion. Yep. It did not follow the criteria, so I apologize, but go ahead.
You're correct. Yeah, he has, 40 to 50 pounds probably on Pillman and the experience, because Pillman was still pretty darn new in the business, but obviously Pillman was much more athletic and everything. And I too have a bias as well towards Pillman for the same reasons you mentioned, but if we're looking at it from that angle, I I would also actually go with Pillman just on the total package, charisma and everything. Pillman's the man.
All right. Well, yeah, Mike, let's get your input on this one. And unless you use your veto, even if you go with Regal, it looks like Pillman will be moving on.
Yeah, Pillman will move on. I actually am going to go the other way and pick Regal, but I'm not going to use my veto yet. So just because Regal, was I think a legit tough guy, and not that Pillman wasn't, but Regal was. I mean, they were both good in the ring, but I don't know, Regal, his personality, the character, he could do, comedy, he could be serious, he could work different kinds of matches with different, he could go with big guys, small guys. So I think Regal was very versatile, and again, Pillman was an amazing athlete, but I think I'm gonna go with Regal on this one, but I will save the veto so we can let Pillman move on to round 2.
Sadly, both men struggled with bad substance abuse and everything, which I'm pretty sure that Regal has defeated that in his life, which is good. I don't think Pillman ever did, unfortunately.
Very common when you're beating your body up like that.
Yep.
I mean.
Yep. And that was, I think, Regal's longevity, but at the same time, if it was just basically them two going head to head one time, and we're not taking like their career longevity into account, but yeah, Regal's, I don't think he ever wrestles anymore, but I think he's like the commissioner of NXT or GM or whatever the role is defined as.
Well, kind of a hometown decision then in round 1. As we said, Brian Pillman squeaking by 2-1. Let's move on to the second matchup. It randomly generated the British Bulldog against Nikita Koloff. I don't know if the ring could hold these two mammoths, but I'll let one of you go ahead and start this off.
Ooh,
you want to start off with that one? I'm thinking.
Yeah, I'm thinking too, but oh man.
I mean, you got a couple of guys that were primarily tag wrestlers, but also did a lot of single in their careers. Two obviously powerful men. Wow. Yeah.
And again, I'm trying not to take like the longevity. This guy was only really big for like say 4 years versus this guy that had a career that spanned 10 or 15 years. I'm just trying to, if they just went head to head one time, and yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, they're all probably going to be difficult, but man, I think I'm going to go, as much as I love Nikita, I think I'll go with the British Bulldog in this case, just because I think Bulldog was more well-rounded. As much as I appreciated Nikita, I don't think Nikita had the moveset or the depth that Davey Boy had. I think Davey was very versatile, and both men were powerhouses, so that kind of cancels each other out. So
yeah,
I will just, based on the the abilities and the in-ring work, I think I will go with the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith.
All right. Marty, what are your thoughts?
Well, out of the gate, let me just say that you mentioned a bias for Pillman. Just in general, what's tough for me is I have a bias towards the Jim Crockett promotion / NWA wrestler, so that makes it a little tough. So without question, partial to NWA talent, but I'm gonna. I hate to do it. I'm gonna side with Mike on this one and go with British Bulldog because I guess a couple reasons. One, British Bulldog literally had a love for the business, and the business was his life. He was trained with the Hart family and everything. Nikita, admittedly, wrestling was just a job to him. and I think he played his character amazing. As some people may not know, he stayed in character and spoke that broken English for years to everyone. If it was a woman he dated, a doctor he went to, he always did that, which was amazing. But kind of what Mike said, the Bulldog to me was more of a top tier wrestler for a real long period of time. I'll go with Bulldog.
Okay. And I agree with the sentiments from both of you. Again, Marty and I are a little closer in age, and grew up watching NWA. So, as he said, I am absolutely biased towards the NWA wrestlers. I do think British Bulldog was just, and again, we're looking at wrestling ability. I think he was just a more well-rounded wrestler. As much as I love Nikita, I think he's a great, great character. I probably would agree and go with the Bull, just trying to be as unbiased as I can, and go with the Bulldog. So, Bulldog is going to move on to round 2 to face Brian Pillman. But before we get there, and Marty, we're going to let you take this one. We have Ted DiBiase versus Tully Blanchard.
Wow.
Well, this is one of the easiest ones for me. However, again,
I think I'm going to agree with you, but I apologize. I just wanted to say that.
Well, maybe let's see how it goes. But again, my bias, I am a huge Tully Blanchard fan. He was not only a tremendous wrestler, is the term they used, he was a heat magnet. He knew how to get the fans to freaking hate him. He played his character tremendously. A great heel, great wrestler, but to me, Ted DiBiase literally might be, if he's not in the top 10, he's easily in the top 20 of best workers of all time, in my opinion. I'm easily going to go with Ted DiBiase, even though I love Tully Blanchard.
All right, well, I'll kind of mix it up and jump in the middle here. You got to look at. I'm going Ted DiBiase, pre-$1 Million Man. I mean, that was a pretty good gimmick for the WWF, but I'm just not a fan of that sort of thing. But with that being said, and again reiterating Tully, just a childhood favorite. Obviously, the Four Horsemen, all his accomplishments with Arn Anderson, etc. But Ted DiBiase, he is a legend in pro wrestling. I mean, I don't even know all the stops that man made. Obviously, I remember him in the UWF when I was younger. Just phenomenal. So, in my opinion, has to be Ted DiBiase, which is a shame. I would have loved to have moved Tully on, but that's what is going to make this podcast different. It's matchups. If Tully would have been against somebody else, he probably would have moved on, but not against Ted DiBiase. So, yeah. Mike, what do you think?
And I will agree. I'll go with Ted. I know I'm, a little bit younger, so I don't remember as much of Tully, but I do appreciate what I have seen of Tully. And he was a fantastic worker, really, owned the gimmick, great heel. But yeah, the same can be said for Ted. And yeah, even with that, the $1 Million Man gimmick, which I know some people don't like, he made it work. He was arguably their top heel for a number of years there, and he was just a fantastic worker.
And let's not forget too that he had Virgil with him, and Virgil had a particular set of skills that were impressive as well. So
he had a skill
that I think would boost Ted up the list a little bit too, just having that kind of support.
Oh, yep. So, yeah, I would agree. And with what Marty said, I'm
going to have a lot of editing to do here.
Yeah, he was arguably one of the, 10 or 20 best workers of all time. Yeah, Ted was fantastic and had, I know this is unrelated to the in-ring work, but had arguably one of the best beards in professional wrestling history. So,
Yeah, he did.
so I have to go, with Ted DiBiase
Yeah.
as well.
Well, that matters. It's the whole package if you want to be world champion. So,
Plus,
And
I imagine it would soften the blow of some of Tully's punches as
True.
well. So,
yep, absolutely,
And-
very thoughtful.
and Mike had said, he made the gimmick what it was. That was a good comment, Mike, because to me, the WWF had the most goofy, outlandish cartoon type gimmicks. The $1 Million Man could have easily been in that same ballpark, but yeah, Ted DiBiase made it seem believable and played the a-hole role to a T.
Yeah, he absolutely did.
He got lucky when he picked out of the box of gimmicks.
Yep,
So,
true.
he could have ended up with a red mohawk. So,
All right, so Ted DiBiase is going to move on to round 2 to face either Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff or Razor Ramon, who I'm going to refer to as Scott Hall. I'll go ahead and kick this one off. I would kind of put Paul in there with Ted DiBiase, not quite to that level, but another legendary figure. I will say it again, I am not partial to WWF. And I know Scott Hall was, just as much, well, he had a greater impact on WCW, was just what I choose to remember him as. But in head-to-head, just kind of like skill set, and not taking away from Scott. I mean, Scott Hall was probably an underrated performer. I mean, his sell was fantastic, offensively and defensively. But I'm going to, tear up my gut a little bit here and go with a WWF superstar and go with Paul Orndorff. What say you, gentlemen?
I'll jump in the middle here because it looks like Marty's going to be the tiebreaker because I think I'm going to go with Scott Hall.
All right.
And again, I don't have as much of a memory of Orndorff in the 80s. I remember him much more actually when he was in WCW in the 90s, and he was at least primarily, when I remember, he was a tag team guy with with Paul Roma. Pretty wonderful. So yeah, and yeah, Paul was, even then he was still a darn good worker. But Scott Hall, whether you go to the Scott Hall, from the 80s when he was absolutely massive.
Oh gosh.
And even into the 90s when he was, when he was first in the WCW, he was massive.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went to WWF, and I mean, he was, a fantastic worker. Even I don't know, I don't remember him as much, in the early days if he was, what kind of worker he was then. But yeah, those later years in WWF, WCW, when him and Nash came back, he was, still a fantastic worker. He had slimmed down some, but he was still, a great worker. So yeah, I think I'm, just based on the work, and again, nothing against Paul, because Paul was a good worker, but Scott Hall's another one of those guys that was just, he was wonderful to watch in the ring at times. So let's go with Scott Hall on this one.
All right, well, I'm excited for the tiebreaker here.
Boy, this is one of the tougher ones for me because, these guys are both incredible. And from, Mike's point of view, Scott Hall was a big, big deal in the, mid or later 90s, obviously, with the NWO. He was, one of the centerpieces of that. So he was a big deal. Paul Orndorff, holy smokes. If you talk about the mid-ish 80s, he was headlining with Hulk Hogan for a long time, so he was the top heel, and he was kind of partnered with Roddy Piper, and people hated them. He played the heel role, spot on as well. Phew, it's a tough one. They're both real good workers. Man, my I'm going to go with my first instinct, and it might just be, again, because I'm a little more old school. In a very close one, I'm going to go with Mr. Wonderful. But it's close, very close.
Okay. Now, we can proceed with Mr. Wonderful 2-1, unless Mike would want to veto that.
No, I'm gonna save it.
Okay.
Because like I said, I do, either way, because Paul was a heck of a worker, but yeah, just kind of going off, more my era, the late 80s, into the, of course, pretty much all the 90s, I remember Scott Hall much more than I do Paul, so, but yeah, not enough to use my veto, so.
Okay.
It looks like the Diamond Stud is out.
Yeah, that was a tough one for all of us there. That was a close battle. We're going to move on to one that I don't think is going to be as close. However, we will see. And I think Mike will give you the choice out of the gate here. This is going to be Roddy Piper against Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
I think this one is actually going to be, well, it's going to be fairly easy. I'm going to go with Piper. And I know as a kid, I loved Snuka. I'm assuming it was the high flying, the splash and all that really caught my attention. So yeah, as a kid, I loved Snuka, but Piper was just, maybe one of the 5 greatest heels. He wasn't necessarily the greatest worker, but just the character. I know he got heel heat like very few other guys, maybe in the history of the business. He's been stabbed multiple times, and so yeah, you got to be getting some heel heat to literally have multiple people try to kill you. So Piper was damn good at what he did. He was a great heel. He owned that character, and so I'm gonna have to go with Piper on this one.
Okay, Marty, I guess we'll let you have number 2, or the second input, I should say.
I have a feeling I know where this is going.
Oh yeah, I'm echoing the sentiment of Mike. This one's pretty easy for me. I'm gonna go with Piper. Piper just, again, you talk about longevity. Piper started out in the late. Either mid or late 70s, was a huge star in the 80s. He transcended wrestling and was, a big-time actor in Hollywood. Came back to wrestling, years later, and again was, he could have been a top guy if he spent more time there. Yeah, when you look at the total wrestler, Piper had it all. The gimmick, he was great on the mic. He wasn't, like Mike said, a great wrestler, but he was good enough and just an amazing character. Definitely Roddy Piper.
Yeah, and I think when you're going with, looking at everything as we should be doing, I think, some of at least some of my opinions are swayed by bias and not remembering the criteria as I explained it in the beginning. But Roddy was one of the all-time greatest characters. I'm not going to put a whole lot of time into this one. Definitely, in terms of who should be a champion, Roddy Piper has got to be at the top of anyone's list. So at least for round 1, we're going to move Roddy Piper on 3-0. Roddy Piper's foe in round 2 will be between Raven and Rick Rude. And I guess I'll stick with it here. I think it's my pick, I should say, to at least to start number 1. And I think this is going to be a 3-0 sweep as well. I'm not going to put a whole lot into it. I don't have the deep knowledge base that you two guys have, but I'll just say Rick Rude, just terms of career, everything he accomplished, the body. Just the body alone should get him to move on to round 2. The sex appeal.
The mustache.
Yep.
Not forget about that.
He had it all. So, in my technical breakdown, Rick Rude. What do you guys think?
Well, you're right. This one's not too difficult. Rick Rude, definitely. Rick Rude. It's funny because I don't think he was the greatest worker. He got a lot better late in his career, but in the '80s when he started out and he came through Memphis, and he was as green as goose stuff. But yeah, his body, and again, he owned that cocky heel character. I mean, to a T. Yeah, definitely Rick Rude on all facets.
All right.
I'm gonna I'm gonna agree as well. Yeah, Raven. Raven. I remember in the late '90s, WCW wasn't bad, but yeah, Rick Rude. Again, the body. He was, in my opinion, a better worker, at least from what I remember, than Raven was. I'm got to go with Rick Rude. I've always been a Rick Rude fan anyway, and yeah, again, no offense to Raven, but yeah, Rick Rude definitely.
Yeah, and Raven maybe known more for ECW, maybe tarnished a little bit in terms of what he could actually do because of their unique ultra hardcore style. But anyway, yeah, clearly, I think we would all three go with Rick Rude.
Oh, yeah.
And we did. So I don't think we all went with Rick Rude.
Yep.
So we'll move on to the last two here. We'll let Marty get the first say on this one, and then Mike, you can get the first say on the last bracket in the first round. This is going to be a toughie. This is going to be Arn Anderson against Magnum TA.
You're right. This is a toughie, but it's not. It's a toughie because, I'm a huge fan of both of these guys. And look at the spectrum. Arn Anderson, tremendous heel, member of the Four Horsemen. He knew how to draw heat in and out of the ring. Amazing on the mic. Just a great heel. Then on the opposite end, Magnum TA, tremendous baby face. I mean, the passion and the energy he had, the intensity. If we're talking about facial hair, the mustache, Magnum TA was an amazing baby face.
What about his chest hair as well?
Oh, yeah. They both have it. Magnum's may have been a little fuller. I mean, if you're talking about who was the better wrestler, I'm going with Arn Anderson. Magnum wasn't bad, but Arn Anderson on that. However, if we're looking at this trying to be objective in the whole spectrum, I hate to do this, but I'm going to go with Magnum TA. I mean, as some people may know, some people may not, he was in line to win the title from Ric Flair at, was it Starrcade 86 before he was in that bad car wreck. So he was going to be the face of, NWA. Just based on that, the major push, he was a superstar. I'm going with Magnum.
Yeah, career cut way too short there, unfortunately. Mike, since you'll get to be first out of the gate with the next one, I'll let you go here in the middle, and then I'll finish this one up.
This is going to be another tiebreaker. I'm going to go with Arn for a lot of the same reasons that Marty said. Arn, and again, no offense to Magnum, because what I've seen of Magnum, he was a heck of a worker. But Arn was a great worker. Had, and again, no fault to Magnum's. I know his career was cut short because of the car wreck, but Arn's, career lasted for almost 20 years. I know he had some injuries as well that affected his career, but Arn, the mic skills, the in-ring work, and Arn was able to do it all. He was a single star. He was a tag team champion with 4 or 5 different guys. He so I think I'm gonna go just the total package. Yeah, the versatility, the ring work, mic skills, everything combined. I think I'm gonna go with Arn over Magnum.
Yeah, this is probably the toughest one for me because I grew up in the peak of, and I shouldn't say grew up, but was a fan and watched wrestling constantly, specifically NWA when Magnum was the huge superstar. I mean, everybody knew he was going to be the champion. He was, I guess, for really lack of a better way of putting it, was going to be like the next Hulk Hogan. That's, I think, where his trajectory was. Probably, and let me take a say, he wouldn't have reached the heights of Hulk Hogan. But for the NWA, he would have been the Hulk Hogan of the NWA. But Arn, just phenomenal again in every way. I mean, mic skills, offensive skills, defensive, or selling skills. I try to think if you put him in the ring at that time, which they did meet many a time, mostly in tag situations. If Arn wasn't able to have interference, if they were in a cage, I think Magnum would have walked out the champion. Or the winner, I should say. But Arn Anderson's accomplishments, he was just so good. And Magnum, it's unfortunate that we didn't have that, weren't able to see, the remainder of his career. Man, this this one is difficult.
Yes, it is.
I think by a shred, and only because the career was cut short, I'm going to go with Arn Anderson on this one.
Wow.
Yeah, just because we were able to see more and just, there pretty much was just similar in different bodies. Magnum's mic skills were great. His ring work wasn't quite what Arn Anderson was, but his charisma, was off the chain. So.
And did Magnum ever work? Because that's another thing. Like with Arn, just kind of like Rick worked heel and face, and obviously people can argue what kind of face Arn and Rick were, but I think they were able to do it somewhat successfully. So I don't know if Magnum ever worked heel, or was he more of like a Ricky Steamboat where he was just a lifetime baby face?
I don't know. Wasn't he a Midnight Rider? Were they heels? Managed by Baby Doll?
I do not believe that Magnum ever was a heel.
So, we are going to squeak Arn Anderson by, unless Marty wants to veto.
I'll tell you what, I disagree with you guys, but it is close enough. And again, I'm a huge fan of Arn Anderson. It's close enough where I'm not going to use the veto, but I do think Magnum obviously, if he wasn't injured, he would have been NWA World Champion probably for a long time. Arn Anderson, we did see his whole career, and he never was. But I'm not going to use the veto.
Okay. So Arn Anderson, by a slim margin, is going to move on against, I'd say the toughest matchup, at least to this point. It's only going to get tougher as we move on. But this is an interesting one next, and Mike, you take the lead on this. It is Jake the Snake Roberts against someone whose career was also cut short, in Owen Hart.
Oh, man. Whew. Yeah, that's a tough one. Again, as a kid, I think I was a fan of Jake. Not as much the ring work, and, he was kind of the opposite of Rick Rude. It certainly wasn't the body. But I think it was mostly the snake that intrigued me. So as a kid, I was a fan of Jake. But I think I'm going to go with Owen. If you're going off mic skills, Jake was heads and above, better than Owen. I don't think Owen was ever the best on the mic, but Owen's ring work and Owen to me is probably, one of the top, just like most of these guys, one of the top, 5-10 guys to never win a belt. Owen was a heck of a worker. He had some classic matches. And that's the thing, again, Jake was a heck of a worker, but I can't really think of any matches that you would say, were all-time classics that Jake was involved in, where Owen was involved in quite a few. I know he had that WrestleMania match with Brett back in the early to mid 90s, which I think is often considered one of the best WrestleMania matches of all time. So yeah, just, the athleticism, the in-ring work. I think I'm going to go with Owen over Jake.
All right. Well, and Marty, I'll put you on the hot seat and let you go last because I'm going to go the opposite here, and I'm going to go with Jake Roberts. And I'm going primarily for, the before the snake gimmick. Jake was, pretty much a very top-notch superstar in every organization that he wrestled in. And obviously I also remember him primarily from, I guess NWA a little bit, but, the snake gimmick. But I do know enough about his past that, to know that he was a top-notch guy, very skilled, and, pretty good on the mic, too, in terms of a whole package. Owen, I know, really known for in-ring work. Again, I wasn't a WWF fan. But, just the Hart name, as accomplished as his brother was. I think Owen was right there skill-wise. So I guess really it is a little closer than I initially thought, but I'm still going to stick to my guns, and I'm going to split this 1-1. I'm going to go with Jake Roberts. So, Marty, what do you think?
Well, this one, obviously, if you were to go with your, emotions, your heartstrings would say Owen. I think everyone that knows anything about wrestling knows the Owen Hart tragedy. And literally, I've never heard anyone in the wrestling industry say anything negative about Owen.
Well, I have. His name was Steve Austin.
Oh, true. Because of the injury.
Yes.
Well, apart from that, what I think was neat from a personal thing, too, is people would say that Owen Hart was one of those guys that was never a chance that he was going to feed on his wife on the road. He was a true family man. I respect that a ton. Really good worker. However, for me, if we're looking at this from a kayfabe angle, Owen Hart, unfortunately, for most of his WWF run, which is what he's known for, Vince had him in dumb blue blazer gimmick where he was sort of a jobber. He put over a lot of people as the blue blazer. Mike mentioned his angle with Bret Hart, and I know they had an acclaimed match. And obviously, Owen was a great worker and athletic. On the flip side, Jake Roberts, I think, was equally a good worker, a totally different type of style. You talk about the psychology, Jake Roberts had it down to a T in the ring. Great on the mic. Unfortunately, I'm looking at it again from kayfabe. To me, most of Owen's career was a mid-carder, the blue blazer, unfortunately. Jake Roberts was a bigger star. It's a close one, but I'm going to go with Jake's name.
All right, Mike, you have a veto available if you feel strongly.
No, again, I want to save it for, something that I, basically like you just said, that I feel a little stronger about. And, like I said, it's no offense to Jake that I went with Owen, because, I know Jake was a good worker, was good on the mic. And I just kind of went with Owen, mostly just based on the athleticism, just imagining if they had a one-off match. But, I don't feel strong enough about the result to veto it. So Jake in his traditional karate garb can go ahead.
All right, well, that finishes.
If we're talking didn't he wear like those karate pants before he was Jake the Snake? Or am I making that up?
No, he had on those kind of loose fitting. I don't know what you call the
or like bell bottoms or whatever they were,
and the cowboy boots. Yep.
All right. Well, Jake and his bell bottoms move on to round 2 to face Arn Anderson. So that'll be an interesting discussion. But let's go ahead and we'll start off round 2. Here we have our Elite 8. I'll give a quick rundown here, and Marty will let you have the first crack at our first matchup. But really quickly here in round 2, we're going to have Brian Pillman against the British Bulldog, Ted DiBiase against Paul Orndorff, Roddy Piper versus Rick Roode, and Arn Anderson against Jake the Snake. So, Marty, what are your feelings on Brian Pillman, who defeated William Regal, versus British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, who defeated Nikita to make it to round 2?
Well, we're in the Elite 8 now, so we're starting to get down there. And to me, based on the criteria at the start of the podcast, I'm going to go a lot more with, kayfabe, looking at, as if this was real, what each guy could do and what they did. Brian Pillman, again, amazing athlete before he was injured. He started out in Calgary and proved himself, but then came to WCW. He worked a very well-known match with Ric Flair on WCW Saturday Night that he proved he could hang with the big boys. Pillman was awesome character. British Bulldog, not so much as far as character. Doesn't have the athleticism of Pillman, but was a good worker and strongman. Just based on kayfabe, British Bulldog outweighs Pillman by holy smokes. Probably, I don't know, I'm going to say close to 70 pounds. I'm going to go with Bulldog just based on that angle that he'd be way too strong for Pillman. I hate to do it, but I'm going Bulldog.
Well, I'll put myself in the tough spot of going third, potentially. Mike, we'll let you jump in here with your thoughts.
Depending on which way you're going to lean, you may end up having to use a veto then, because I think I'm going to go with the British Bulldog as well, just kind of for the same reasons that Marty just said. I think, both of them were fantastic workers. I know Davey Boy had a longer career, but yeah, the weight difference, Davey, especially in those early days, was massive, and not that Pillman wasn't in fantastic shape, but Davey Boy had to outweigh Pillman by, I don't know what it would have been, like 50, 60 pounds or something. Who knows? But I think if they just, a one-off match, I think that size and the strength would be too much for Pillman. So, I think I'm going to go with Davey Boy as well.
All right. Well, there will be no veto. I was leaning towards Davey Smith as well. I just think, that, again, using the criteria, the styles, the high-flying style of a prime Brian Pillman coming off the top rope, I think, David Smith would just catch him and do what he wanted with him, turn any, high, like a cross-body block off the top rope into a power slam. So, size difference, tremendous skill with the British Bulldog. I want to go in my heart with WCW and move Brian on. And, of course, being a Cincinnatian, want to go with Brian as well, but I think we got to clearly go with the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, to advance to the Final Four.
Can I jump in just real quick with
a little
caveat? If you're talking about British Bulldog, when he did come into WCW a second time in the later 90s, and he was wearing jeans, or was that when he was in WWF as well?
I know he did it in the WWF, where he was wearing, the jeans.
Yeah, he had the jeans on in WCW as well.
So, if we're taking just that small period of time where he's wearing jeans, I would have put Pillman over, because you can't wear jeans. I'm serious.
You tell that to DDP.
Well, and he was beaten down at that point too. The poor British Bulldog was, severe back issues.
So David is moving on, it sounds like.
Yes. David Smith moves on to the Final Four.
Yeah.
And David Smith's opponent is going to be between Ted DiBiase and Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff. I think it's been a while since I jumped in first. And really, I'm not going to drag this one on. It's everything that I said in round one about Ted DiBiase. Really, I mean, in the Mount Rushmore of pro wrestlers, period. I think maybe, Marty, you mentioned this. You'd be hard-pressed not to put Ted, not on the Mount Rushmore, but like in a top 10 or very, very stretched out top 20 for sure. So, complete package with Ted DiBiase. Without going into any detail, I'll just say Ted moves on. Either one of you can randomly jump in with your thoughts.
I'll go ahead and hop in real quick, just because I'm gonna agree. Ted DiBiase, we've already basically touched on it, but yeah, Ted was the total package. He was great on the mic. He was able to take what a lot of guys would have turned into a goofy gimmick, and made it work, and really got him over. And I know, Orndorff was a big deal in the early to mid 80s, but yeah, Ted overall, the work, making that gimmick work, and mic skills, just everything. I think you have to go with Ted.
All right, Marty, are you gonna dispute this?
I can't. But what I will say is, I actually think Paul Orndorff may even be a little underrated as far as his work. He was an amazing worker, and if anyone can jump on like YouTube, look at some of the few matches that exist from Paul Orndorff from like the late 70s. He was put together, not quite as big as he was in his, like WWF prime, but he was still put together. But he was as athletic as anyone. He had this spot where if someone tried to give him a backdrop, he'd flip and he'd land on his feet. Very athletic, great worker. But like you guys both said, Ted DiBiase was just one of the best ever. I'm going with DiBiase.
Okay, well then we'll jump right into the bottom part of the Final Four bracket here. I think we're probably all going to agree on this one as well, but Marty, we'll let you start on this one. Roddy Piper against Rick Rude.
Well, it's not an easy one, but it is an easy one. I'm a humongous Roddy Piper mark. We talked a lot about him, his gimmick, his character, one of the best heels ever, if not the best heel. But if, again, from a kayfabe point of view, Rick Rude was, a world champion and world-class wrestling for, I think, maybe a year or so. A top dog there. Big player in WWF, then in WCW, top guy. I have to go based on kayfabe alone, plus the total wrestling ability in general, Rick.
Okay. Well, I'll put myself in the hot seat. Mike, we'll let you go next.
Okay. This is a tough one. I think I'm actually gonna go with Piper, and as much as I'm a big Rick Rude fan, Piper, I think Rude was better in the ring, but Piper again was just, and Rude was a great heel too, but Piper was such a good heel, especially in the late 70s, basically throughout all the 80s. Piper was a fantastic heel. He was also an effective babyface. like we already said, great on the mic and really made the his character work. I just so yeah.
Yeah, it's getting difficult when you get down to these rounds.
I did love Roode, and I think just based on in-ring work alone, it would be Roode, but just all the other, I'm gonna go with Piper. As much as it pains me, we're gonna go Roddy.
He's swaying me. I'm almost gonna use a veto of my own.
All right. Well, yeah, this is a tough one because I certainly remember the Smooth Operator, WCCW, and I really enjoyed WCCW. But again, I'm going to just look at the total package. And back in the day, in the 80s, where the NWA was Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes, WWF was Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper. And that's the way I always looked at it. Roddy was literally a top-notch. I mean, if you had a Mount Rushmore, again, using that analogy of just heels, I would think Roddy Piper's probably on there. So, just total package. What he lacked in, in-ring work, which, I mean, he was damn good. It kind of fit his style. His persona is the way he worked. And on the mic, I mean, Jiminy Christmas. Rick Rude was no slouch. But, I mean, Roddy was on another level. So I'm going to go with Roddy Piper. So I think, Marty, maybe that will soothe your feelings of, maybe possibly using your veto on yourself.
Yeah, that's okay. No, I get it. I feel good about the decision.
All right, so let's jump on here, and I guess, Mike, we'll let you go out of the gate with Arn Anderson against Jake the Snake Roberts.
This is a fairly easy one for me. I'm sure it's going to be probably a little more difficult for you guys, but I'm going to go with Arn. Again, most of my memories of Jake were as the Snake, and then that possibly ill-advised run in early 90s WCW, but yeah, just overall, I remember much more of Arn. Arn, to me, was, again, a better worker, and that's no offense to Jake, not saying Jake wasn't, but Arn, could pretty much do it all, the work, the mic, like I already said, singles, tag team, heel, baby face. I mean, Arn was pretty much able to do anything and everything, so I'm going to have to go with Arn on this one.
All right, well, I'll jump into the middle spot here, and we'll put a little potential pressure on Marty. I'm going to agree as much as I like Jake, and again, I'm trying to be unbiased and look at the entire history, and also just kind of envisioning them at their peak, putting them in the ring against each other, and then all of the intangibles. Arn Anderson, just phenomenal. As much as I am an NWA, WCW guy, and never have really liked WWF or WWE, it's interesting that our 3 of the 4 choices moving on here are primarily known for WWF, WWE with Bulldog, DiBiase, and Piper. But Arn Anderson, I think one of the greatest I've ever seen, and I almost hate to say this, is The Rock. The mic skills, his ability to sell, his offense, even from the silly stuff like that damn people's elbow, I mean, his punches. I mean, he's just a phenomenal package. I just think in a totally different way, Arn Anderson is that exact same guy with a little bit of a different body. I mean, his ability to sell, the ability on the mic, phenomenal. So just for the whole package, I'm going with Arn Anderson. So it's 2-0 Arn. Marty, what do you say?
Well, again, I know I don't have to keep saying this, but I'm going to preface that I'm trying to look at, especially as we get deeper in this, everything from the kayfabe point of view. Arn Anderson, you guys kind of covered it all. He could do everything. He was one of the greatest TV champions of all time. I do think maybe Arn Anderson's known a little more as a tag team specialist. No fault of his own. I mean, he could do it all. Jake Roberts, was pretty much exclusively a singles wrestler. I'm going to shock you guys on this, and I don't like this. I'm ashamed of myself. And,
Don't do this.
yeah, I don't feel very good about it, but from the kayfabe end, I just couldn't see Arn Anderson being booked to beat Jake Roberts, just the level that they were on. And again, I'm totally partial, like you are, with the WCW and the NWA, but I think Jake was more of a top star, and Arn was more of, and again, no fault of his own, he was a little bit in the shadow of Ric Flair, like everyone would have been. Had it not been for Ric Flair, Arn probably would have been a top guy. But I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm going to go with Jake Roberts.
Now, are you feeling strongly enough to use your veto?
No, because I do think Arn Anderson is absolutely tremendous, and there's no way I'd use a veto against Arn Anderson.
All right, well, that takes us down to the final four here, ladies and gentlemen. We have the Davey Boy Smith against Ted DiBiase, and Roddy Piper is going to be going up against Arn Anderson to set up our championship match of the greatest wrestler to never hold a major promotion title, using basically criteria from websites online. Because the more we went through this, I thought to myself, well, geez, we really should have had Curt Hennig in this list because he wasn't WCW or WWE. But this is the list we went with. So if you want to beat us up in the comments, or if there are comments available, go right ahead. But and we can always revisit this with some other sort of criteria.
So that means this list is obviously not, as we'll say, perfect.
No.
It is what it is.
This is what we came up with. This is what we had online. So anyway, so we'll go with British Bulldog here in the final four, taking on Ted DiBiase. I'll go ahead and just start this one.
Do it.
Oh boy. We've mentioned, an all-time legend in Ted, but the technical wrestling ability and the size of the British Bulldog, if anybody could wear his ass out, I'd go with Ted DiBiase. The mindset, the strategy of a younger Ted, not the $1 Million Man Ted. If it was just the $1 Million Man Ted, I'd go with Davey Boy Smith. But looking at the entire career and my, from Ted DiBiase before his $1 Million Man run, is what I'm going to take into account here, and I'm going to go with Ted DiBiase to defeat the British Bulldog 1, 2, 3 in the center of the ring. What do you gentlemen say?
Well, do you want to go?
This might be a clean sweep because I'll go ahead and go then. I mean, I'm going with Ted as well. We've already pretty much said everything we need to say about both guys. Bulldog was a beast, had the athleticism, but yeah, overall, I think I'm gonna go with Ted. I mean, Ted's one of the best workers of all time. Best on the mic. Yeah, just was even as like I've already said, as the $1 Million Man. It could have been a goofy gimmick, but he made that gimmick more than the gimmick made him, in my opinion. So yeah, even with the size difference, a one-off, I'm gonna go with Ted.
All right.
Nice.
This is exciting.
It is. Again, it's a little harder going from the kayfabe point of view just because of the size and strength. But if I look at it again from the total package, Bulldog had some decent runs as a single superstar without question. But I also think probably a lot of people would think of him as the tag team guy because the British Bulldogs were so good. But again, Ted DiBiase is that good, or even the size difference and everything. I think Ted would overcome it, whether he had to use heel tactics like pulling the trunks, or if it was just a baby face, like you said, he'd wear him down if it went 30, 40 minutes. I'm going with DiBiase also.
All right. So a clean sweep for Ted DiBiase, and that is going to move us to another very difficult one, at least in my opinion. And I'm going to let one of you jump in to start this. Wow, is this a matchup? A primetime Roddy Piper against a prime Arn Anderson.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely a tough one. Holy smokes! Again, just sort of off topic. Anyone who's a wrestling fan but not real knowledgeable of the total career, I would suggest to jump on YouTube, look at some of the old interviews and angles of Roddy Piper from the 80s when he was in the NWA territories, whether it was in Portland or when he was in like Georgia Championship Wrestling. Roddy Piper is phenomenal with his character.
Oh yeah,
Life work. He was one of the best ever. When you're talking about wrestling ability, I don't think it's close. I think Arn Anderson, from a wrestling standpoint, is heads and above better than Roddy. I would say Roddy was a better heel, not to take anything away from Arn, because he was a tremendous heel as well. Boy, oh boy, this is a really tough one. Just again, trying to be kayfabe, if we're talking about just each guy wrestling each other. Oh boy, this is a close one. I'm gonna go with AA Arn Anderson. I mean, he had a lot more championships. Long-time TV champion. I'm gonna go with Arn Anderson. It's close though.
All right. Well, Mike, I'll let you jump in here. I'll put myself in the third position.
Okay. Yeah, this is a tough one, but I think I'm gonna agree with Marty. Talked Piper up. The getting the heat, the gimmick. Mic skills. But yeah, Arn was, again, just could do it all. Great worker, arguably the greatest spine buster in professional wrestling history. So yeah, I just imagine, Arn catching Roddy in a spine buster, getting the 1, 2, 3. So I gotta agree, Arn's moving on.
And it's interesting that you say that because, they talk about fighters in the UFC and that, or even boxers, and they kind of do their thing where when they're in training, they just kind of envision how the fight's going to go. And that was the first image that popped up into my mind, a minute from the time limit expiring and Roddy being caught in the spine buster. So great minds think alike, and I have nothing to dispute anything you gentlemen said. And again, not showing my bias towards NWA or WCW. And again, this is what hopefully makes this podcast a little bit unique, as it's tournament format. It's all about matchups. Piper certainly would be a worthy champion. I think for us to crown at the end here is the greatest to never win a world title. But in this particular matchup, I'm also going to go with Arn Anderson. And by a slim margin at this point. Everything's going to be a slim margin, but definitely Arn Anderson in my opinion. So that lays the groundwork for our championship bout. The greatest to never win a major promotion world title. Again, I apologize. This probably should be one of these two gentlemen against Curt Hennig. if we're just using WCW and WA and WWE, WWF as the criteria, I initially was thinking AWA and things like that, which is why Curt didn't make the list. But then the more I thought about it as we went on, I'm like, oh, shoot, that doesn't make sense. He should have been on here. So forgive me. That was my fault. However, we are still down to two worthy champions, Ted DiBiase and Arn Anderson. Since you guys are much more knowledgeable on the subject of pro wrestling, I'll start off to get my take out of the way. Again, tremendously biased towards Arn. Loved the Four Horsemen, loved NWA. However, just Ted DiBiase, trying to be unbiased, looking at the total package. I mean, on the mic, they're really close, maybe a slight edge to Arn. In ring, I mean, holy moly. Both phenomenal. I mean, I'd almost say maybe a slight edge to Arn, which wouldn't make sense then, because I'm going to go with Ted DiBiase here. Just again, looking at the whole picture, all of the accomplishments, trying to envision them in the ring together in their primes, which probably would have been a babyface Ted against a heel Arn. But I just have my gut's telling me Ted, so that's my take. I'll get myself out of the way. What do you guys think?
Well, I'll jump in and go second just because the suspense.
Because
to imagine what Marty's going to do. Since you went Ted, I'm actually going Arn. But to make things interesting.
Man.
Again, both guys, fantastic workers, great on the mic. I can't say anything bad about either one of them. But at the end of the day, I'm going to go with Arn just because of the accomplishments. Arn's been a tag team champion, like I said earlier, with multiple different guys. He's been a TV champion, 3-4 times. Yeah, I mean, Arn's held gold. He's been a WWF tag team champion, so he was able to transition over there successfully, came back to the NWA, then WCW, was the TV champion a few more times, I believe. So yeah, Arn's held gold, in multiple decades and different promotions, and he's been, like I said, one of arguably the greatest, if not one of the greatest, definitely the greatest, in my opinion, television champion of all time. So based on all the gold he's held, because it's so close in every other aspect, I think I'm going to go with Arn Anderson. So we are going to let Marty decide the greatest professional wrestler.
Yeah, talk about the hot seat.
Boy, a wise man once said, with great power comes great responsibility, and I'm a nervous wreck right now.
Technically, we could all veto each other, I guess.
Yeah. Well,
we have not used our veto.
Yeah, that's what's neat. Wow.
You need a break.
How about we cut the podcast and we do a part 2? I guess, fittingly, because it's the championship, this might be the hardest one. So I guess that's, fitting. Man, Mike covered a lot of great stuff there. Arn Anderson, yeah, he's done it all from the angle of being, a high mid-carder or, not quite the top guy, but, very close. Multi-time TV champion. Again, Mike said one of the best, not the best TV champ ever. Multi-time, tag team champion. When you go and look at Ted DiBiase, Ted DiBiase had a lot of gold too, and he started out, I believe, a few years earlier than all in the earlier 70s. And Ted DiBiase also held, a lot of gold, a lot of different regional titles and, things of that nature. In the Mid-South, he was a big deal. He was their, champion there. I think North American champion is what it was. Then in WWF, he had the imaginary $1 million belt, which was, again, goofy in itself. And Mike said Ted DiBiase made the gimmick more than the gimmick made him, and I agree with that, actually. This one is so close, so tough. If I'm looking at it from, again, not to beat this into the ground, the kayfabe angle on who I think would have more potential or more believable as a world champion, gosh, by the slimmest of margins.
Here we go.
I'm gonna go with Ted DiBiase. I hate to do that though, because I would be very comfortable with Arn, but I'm barely gonna go with Ted. Want somebody to use a veto or?
Well, and I have to say that I appreciate. I think at least Marty and I have to have a bias towards NWA. So that we've come down to, and again, I can tell you I'm not going to use a veto as much as I picked Ted. So obviously I'm not using a veto, but yeah. Now, Mike, I don't know, since this is the initial podcast, it is our pilot, so to speak. I don't know if we should allow veto on the final selection, but maybe we should, because if you use yours, then Marty or I will just use ours.
Yeah, I wouldn't use it anyway. It's close enough, because like I said, there's definitely no really downside to Ted either. So yeah, they would both make a fantastic world champion, and
Yeah.
I do agree with what Marty said there at the end, that just if you imagine one of those two guys with the gold around their waist, I definitely could see Ted holding that strap. And I will say, on a side note, at least one thing in Ted's favor, at least he was never cross-faced in the parking lot of a gas station.
That's true.
We all remember Arn was, so
Yep.
I will say that in Ted's
Thank
favor.
God the police intervened in that.
Yep. Ted would have beat the piss out of Eric Watts, where Arn did not. So I will agree with but yeah, it's close enough to I'm not gonna, even if I can, I'm not gonna use the veto because Ted deserves it as well.
Well, all right. Well, I think we have crowned a deserving champion, and as I mentioned, our pilot episode of the tournament podcast here, Ted DiBiase started off by defeating Tully Blanchard, moved on to defeat Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, then defeated Davey Boy Smith, then met Arn Anderson in the championship round, and by slim margin took home the crown as our greatest wrestler of all time to never win a major promotion title, pretty much just meaning WWE or WCW, if you want to look at it that way. So it was fun. It was a nice conversation here. We are about an hour, and, well, depending on some edits, this will probably wind up being a little over an hour of a discussion. Hope if anybody is listening to this you enjoy, please comment if that is available. Give us your thoughts. Did we miss out on anybody? Did we not include someone? Did we make a poor choice? What is your veto? Let us know in the comments below.
And if the family of Curt Hennig happens to be listening, we apologize on Tom's behalf.
Yes.
Out there.
I do. I just looked at some websites because I didn't want it to be my opinion putting these guys in this bracket. I wanted it to be an outside source, and depending on what I was looking at, Curt Hennig was not in there. So Ted DiBiase is our champion, Arn Anderson runner-up, and I'm going to put Curt Hennig in third place then. That's my veto.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, I don't want the podcast to go over and this
no.
to be edited out or bonus content. Just very quickly for both of you guys, if Curt was in here, no matter what the seating, is there anyone in our list that either of you think would beat Curt Hennig?
Yeah, because again, Curt was right in my wheelhouse. Obviously from AWA all the way through.
It would be the seedings, I guess, would be at play.
Yeah, that'd be tough.
Curt was an amazing worker and maybe one of, if not the best, definitely one of the best sellers of all time. Maybe, I know some people could say he went overboard at times, but I thought he was entertaining as hell. So yeah, it's
yeah. I mean, if he matched up against maybe a prime Roddy Piper, obviously if he would have matched up early, maybe in the first round with Ted DiBiase, that would have been a tough one. Because even if he would have matched up in round 1 against Arn, as much as I love Arn, I probably would have pushed Curt forward. So, yeah, I don't know. He certainly would be a worthy champion. So we'll have to do something similar here and make sure that whatever the criteria is, whatever the theme of the podcast, that Mr. Hennig is certainly included. So we do apologize.
Can I throw out one last thing?
Oh, boy, we're running out of time, but that's all right.
This is worth it. Trust me. If we have a Patreon, how about we redo this whole tournament? We kick Raven out. We're putting in Curt Hennig and reshuffling the order. That's your Patreon content, guys.
There you go. I like it. I like it a lot.
Like, share, and subscribe.
Yep, there you go. So hopefully this is the start of something big. You never know. We will see. So thank you guys for the time here. We've been going about an hour and a half, but obviously we will edit this down. I'm going to go ahead and record now. So I appreciate it. This was fun.
Guys.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you. See you next week.